the more I learn about feminism, the more I also start to learn about racism and um, how they're connected. You know, how the oppression of women and the oppression of people of color is very similar and different too, but there are a lot of similarities there. So if I want to be free, it makes sense to care about people of color being free too. It was all part of the same awakening for me, realizing, oh, there are things in my life that are hard not because of who I am as an individual or and not because it's necessarily like that for everybody, but specifically because I am female. It took a long time for me to really realize this. I really didn't get it until a few years ago. I started to kind of like wake up to the reality of like, oh, I just never realized that it's because I'm a woman. Like, that's why people think I don't know what I'm talking about. Or, like, that's why it's, like, hard for me to get my voice heard in a group, especially a group of men. And that's why, etc., etc. Oh, men aren't afraid of getting raped subconsciously all the time. Um, Stuff like that. And so that's when I started to understand what male privilege means and what it is that I don't have as a female. And at about the same time, I also started to learn what white privilege means and to understand that in the same exact way that a man can feel safe and get his voice heard in a situation where I can't. There are also situations where I can feel safe and I can get my voice heard when a person of color can't. And in a very similar way, if I would be willing to use my white privilege to help a person of color, that would be awesome for them in the same way that it would be really awesome for me if I'm standing in a group of men and I'm trying to say something and no one will listen. If there was a man present who recognized the fact that he could use his male privilege to bolster my voice, that would be really cool, for him to recognize what's going on and to say, hey, Jen, weren't you trying to say something? So that's him like using his male privilege to bolster my voice. And a white person can do that for a person of color too. Most people have some privileges and some places where they're not privileged. And I guess some people have the worst end of the bargain, and some people have the best end of the bargain, right? So it's a spectrum, right, of privilege. And it's interesting to be a white woman and to really feel the effects of sexism a lot, and at the same time to realize that I still benefit from white privilege. So I have I feel like I have a big experience of oppression and of privilege at the same time. It puts us in a position to really understand both sides of it, because I can get really angry at men for the way that they act towards women and their ignorance towards what a woman's experience is like. But then I can just as easily turn around and realize that I can be just as ignorant and just as lacking in understanding and empathy towards the experience of a person of color. I can make the exact same mistakes. And I think that that's a really rich place to learn as a white woman, to realize that you're on both sides of that. Basically, I could live my whole life without realizing that racism is a problem and that it affects people every single day, and it makes them afraid for their lives, or it makes them lose their lives, or it makes them shrink in their lives in order to try to avoid being targeted with violence. There are so many things that I could completely ignore. So basically, I have to go out of my way to start to learn about the experiences of people of color, and it's easy to start to think that that's like a really special, great thing. Other white people, when I talk about it, will tell me like that's like such a special, great thing. But people of color know better. And they're probably not super excited to give me a pat on the back just for taking the tiniest action of beginning to learn about what their experience is like. A lot of people are annoyed about allies and them wanting cookies in any context. So it's like, so in that context, it would be like, I watched a documentary about African American history. Like, if I was like bragging about that to a person of color, like expecting them to like give me a cookie, you know, give me a pat on the back for taking that action, that's obnoxious. And as a white person who's trying to be good and get better, obviously I can really understand what it feels like to feel like I'm doing all this work, I don't have to do it, like it's uncomfortable, my friends aren't doing it, so like I feel like pretty good about that, and like maybe I want like a pat on the back for that. And when you're inside that, it makes sense. When you're on the other side, it's really obnoxious. And the way that I can understand that is as a woman. If a man comes up to me and says, like, hey, I read an article about rape culture, aren't I awesome? Like, give me a cookie. I would be like, fuck you. You know, because taking a couple of small steps in the direction of tolerance and understanding for an oppressed group is great. It really is great. But to use that small action to try to get something from a person in that group is like so obnoxious. And so in the, you know, as a woman, like, especially when men try to use this to like gain a foothold towards like dating you or something, it's extra creepy, because basically what they're doing is like trying to say like, look, I made a couple of like moves towards feminism, so now I want to use that to try to like get into your pants, which is so weird. I remember before I identified as feminist, it was a couple of years ago. I was in this bar. I was at a comedy show, and I sat down next to this guy, and like he turned to me and he was like, "I'm a feminist," and I was like, "Okay." I guess I look like somebody who would be impressed by a guy saying that he was a feminist, but like it totally didn't work. I was just like, what? Like, I just didn't even get what he was trying to do, but I thought about it a lot later, and I was like, that was really weird. He's using "I'm a feminist" as a pickup line. There's just like so many things that are wrong with that. And it kind of points to the fact that he probably isn't actually a feminist. So I guess that what I'm saying is it is big. The thing, truthfully, the way that I feel about a man taking the time and effort to learn about feminism and learn about the experiences of women and learn what rape culture is and to try to start to do something about it, that is huge. And he doesn't have to do it, and he's not supported in doing that from the men around him probably. And it is big, and I do really appreciate that. But just try and be a little humble about it, and don't get so carried away with how great you are for doing it, because that leads to a very slippery slope of basically just slipping back into your own privilege and trying to use this like little bit of learning and tolerance as like a leverage point to try to like extract something out of a woman, or and very similarly out of people of color. Like basically oppressed groups have experienced enough shit from the people that have power over them. They don't need them to be like making some small steps towards tolerance and then like trying to use that to like get closer to them and maybe be creepy and not actually safe. Sometimes there can be a sense of entitlement, sort of like, oh, I took an African American history class, so now I can say whatever I want about the experience of people of color, and like, no. No. Um, that's my thought of the day. Thanks for listening.